LINQ greatly simplifies the ability to create XML documents. In this lesson, I'll show you the evolution of creating XML documents from string concatenation to XmlWriter, and then how to create XML documents with LINQ. Let's start out with a generic list of customers, and we need our customer class first. So here it is, first name, last name, age. And then we'll have our list that we create. And you see here that all of the objects are being defined in one line. That's a very nice syntax of C#. And what we want to do is turn this collection of objects into an XML document. The first way we'll do that is by simply running through the collection of objects and creating a string. Let me generate a method stub here. And we'll create a string which is then output as the XML document. So here's how we would do that. We pass in our generic list of customers. Then we create a string builder. And at the end, we're going to output the string version of the string builder. And here we simply create the XML declaration as a string. And here we are going through each of the customers, creating an element for each of the customers, with an element for first name, last name, and age for each of the properties. And outside that is an element which holds all of the customer elements called customers. And so if we run this, we see exactly what it looks like. Here's the declaration. Here's the main customers element. And for each customer, there is a customer element with 3 property elements in it. And that always worked, but one problem with it was very prone to error. If you forgot one little bracket or had a capital letter where there should be a lowercase letter, then you had an error in your XML document, or it would be invalid. And another issue was it wasn't very flexible. For instance, here we had tabs for the indentation. If suddenly you needed to have spaces instead of tabs, then you would have to replace all these. So not the best of solutions. So a better way was with XmlWriter. Let me show you how that works. Here we have a method which creates the XML file, or the XML string, with XmlWriter, and it looks like this. So we're going to have to load in system XML, and everything's fine. So what we're doing here is first we set up an object called of type XmlWriter settings, in which we can define all kinds of characteristics of our XML file. So for instance, indent characters is a tab. And if we wanted to change that later to 4 spaces, we could just change it here in one spot, and the whole generation of the XML file would then include the 4 spaces instead of the tab. So the next thing that we do is we actually create a string builder like we did last time, but we just pass it into XmlWriter create, and it takes care of the building of that string builder. And we have to send in the settings as well. And then we start with the document, and then the root element customers. And notice we're not writing any of the brackets ourselves or defining them in strings. That's being taken care of for us. We just have to define what the element is called. And notice also that we say start element and customers, and we don't have to define the word customers again, because of course the end element is going to be named the same. And then we have each of the properties of the object, first name, last name, and age, each with its own element. So if we run this, we see that it is just the same as the other one, just created differently and a bit more efficiently with XmlWriter. So now let's build our XML file with LINQ. So if we replace this here, we have the code which creates the file with LINQ. We need XmlLINQ here, and that takes care of all the issues. So what we're doing here is a bit like in the XmlWriter. We have our declaration being defined by an object, and then we have the root. The declaration is part of the xdoc, which is an X document, and then the xroot is part of the X document in that it's being added to it. And then we simply go through the customers, build an X element, and then add that X element to the root. So in the X-doc, we have the X declaration and the root, and inside the root, we have each of these elements. And inside each of the customer elements are the 3 property elements. Then we simply output the declaration and the body of the document, and we have our XML file. We can look at it, and we see that here's the first one, the second one, and the third one created by LINQ, which has the same content. So you may want to have this for each in your code for creating the XML file because you might have to do some extra logic in here. If you don't, there's an even shorter way to create the XML file with LINQ. Let me show you that. So here we'll call the method which creates it this new shorter way. We'll go to the method, and here's the code. So it's somewhat like the code before with the X document, but it's much simpler. It simply packs all of the objects that is inside each other's constructors. So you have the X declaration right inside the X document. I believe it was like that in the other way too, right? But then we got back out. And here we just keep going. The declaration and then the X element, and then we put in the customers. Now the customers is a generic list of strings, and there's a method called convertAll, which will take each C, which is a customer, and let it be processed by this code here. So you get the same logic that's going on here with the for each loop. And that's why I mentioned earlier, for instance, here, if there are only certain customers that you need processed, or if you have to do any other kind of logic in here, it might be easier to, or more straightforward with the for each loop than having everything so compact here and doing it with these lambdas. But you have the option here. And so if we run this, we see that it is indeed created the same as the others. So there's one more way I want to show you using LINQ. Let's create the stub like this. And this code will look very familiar. It's a lot like the last code. Instead of having or using the convertAll method on the generic list of customers, what we're doing here is using a from_select statement to run through all of these customers and generate the X elements. In essence, these two are the same idea. The reason why you would use one or the other is, for instance, here, if you wanted to do a where statement here or an order by, that kind of thing, you could easily put it in the LINQ syntax here. It's a very nice feature of C# to be able to write in the middle of your code here. I mean, actually, this is all one line to have a LINQ statement being created. So the only other thing that I wanted to show you is how to create a file. So far we've been creating strings and displaying them. This code right here, as long as you have the X-doc, you can just say save and a file name. Very easy. So when we'll run it, it'll display it here because it's still sending back the string. But we see here that it created this text file, and if we look at it, it is indeed an XML file, just as we were printing out. So in this lesson, you saw the evolution of creating XML documents, first string concatenation, then XmlWriter, and then LINQ. And you learned various methods of creating XML documents with LINQ itself.